The conference center lobby was quiet, the kind of corporate silence that hummed with money. Kenneth arrived early. Not because he had to, but because he always did. He liked to see the space before it filled with voices and agendas. Before the politeness kicked in. He wore a plain navy sweater, dark jeans, and a pair of scuffed brown boots. Nothing flashy. Just enough to blend in. The ID badge around his neck was turned backward. He walked past the reception desk without stopping. Security gave him a glance. That kind of glance. But no one said anything. Not yet. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor and stepped into meeting room 3C. The door was already unlocked. The table was long, clean, set for 12. He placed his laptop at the head of the table and pulled out a folder with handwritten notes. No logo. No cover. Just his ideas. He sat down, opened the laptop, and began typing. 10 minutes later, he heard footsteps. The door opened without a knock. A man stepped in mid-40s, stocky, in a security uniform. His badge read C. Harmon. His voice came out casual but firm. You're not supposed to be in here. Kenneth didn't look up right away. He finished his sentence, saved the file, then met the man's eyes. This is room 3C, right? Yeah, Harmon replied. But this one's reserved. Private business function. You need to wait in the lobby. I'm not lost, Kenneth said evenly. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Harmon's eyes narrowed. Do you work for the catering company? Or maybe one of the vendors? Kenneth tilted his head slightly. No. Then I'm going to have to ask you to step out. These rooms aren't open to the public. There was no anger in Kenneth's face. Just stillness. He reached for his folder, opened it, and slid a page across the table. Harmon didn't look. I'm going to need you to leave. Now. Kenneth didn't move. The air shifted. And Harmon's hand moved toward his walkie-talkie. Kenneth watched the guard's hand hover over the walkie-talkie. Still calm. Still sitting. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he said, voice low but firm. Harmon stiffened. Is that a threat? No, Kenneth replied. It's a suggestion. The guard stepped fully into the room now, shoulders squared. Look, I don't know what you think this is, but this space is off limits unless you're on the guest list. Kenneth didn't break eye contact. I am the guest list. Harmon blinked. What's your name? Kenneth didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair. Has the team from Edison Holdings arrived yet? The guard looked confused. No. Not that I know of. They will be here in 15 minutes. When they walk in and see you standing here trying to remove me, he paused, you'll understand why I suggested you wait. There was a knock then. Light, quick. The door opened just an inch. A woman in a black blazer poked her head in, her eyes scanning the room. Mr. Bryce, she asked, glancing past Harmon. Kenneth raised his hand slightly. In here. She smiled, relieved. They're on their way up. Harmon turned to her, puzzled. Who are you? She looked at him plainly. I'm Rachel, executive coordinator for Mr. Bryce. Is there a problem? Harmon didn't respond. Kenneth didn't move. Didn't think so, Rachel added. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind Rachel. Harmon stayed frozen. Kenneth turned the folder back toward himself and continued reviewing his notes, as if the room weren't full of tension. As if the guard hadn't just tried to remove him from his own meeting. I didn't realize, Harmon started, voice quieter now. No, you didn't, Kenneth said. His tone hadn't changed, but the words felt heavier now. Harmon shifted his weight awkwardly. There's just a lot of people coming through here today. Hard to tell who's who sometimes. Kenneth nodded slightly. That's true. People make assumptions. Harmon didn't answer. Kenneth finally looked up again. If I'd walked in wearing a tailored suit, would we be having this conversation? The question hung there. No accusation in the tone. Just reality. Harmon didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step back. I'll let the front desk know you're cleared. Kenneth nodded once. Good idea. As the guard turned and left, the room felt heavier for a moment. Not because of what was said, but because of what hadn't been. The door closed behind Harmon with a soft thud. Kenneth sat still. He didn't check his phone. Didn't type. He just sat. Quiet filled the room again, but it was different now. Waited. The kind of quiet that comes after someone realizes they've misjudged the situation and the one they misjudged didn't flinch. He didn't need to. That was the power. 10 minutes passed. One by one, people began to arrive. Well-dressed. Confident. Carrying laptops and talking in clipped sentences about market trends, partnerships, quarterly projections. They entered the room, saw Kenneth, and every single one of them greeted him the same way. Good morning, Mr. Bryce. Morning, sir. Looking forward to your presentation. Harmon didn't return, but one of the front desk clerks peeked into the room during the introductions. Her eyes scanned the space, landed on Kenneth at the head of the table, then quickly disappeared. They knew now. But Kenneth had known all along. He just needed them to see it for themselves. Kenneth stood once the last executive took their seat. The room quieted immediately. He didn't clear his throat or tap on the table. He just looked around, let the silence stretch. Made sure he had their attention, not by demand, but by presence. Let's begin, he said. He walked slowly to the whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and started writing key points: equity strategy, operational realignment, vendor accountability. Nothing flashy. Just facts clearly laid out. But every eye followed his hand. Every word landed. At some point during the opening remarks, Rachel came in and placed a bottle of water at his seat. She didn't interrupt. Didn't need to. They all knew who he was now. Kenneth Bryce. CEO. Majority stakeholder. The man whose name sat atop the agenda even if they hadn't read it closely when they first walked in. And outside the room, behind tinted glass, Harmon lingered in the hallway. Watching. Not because he was told to. Because he needed to. Because the story was already spreading. Kenneth continued with the presentation. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. But every word carried authority, the kind that doesn't need to be declared. As he outlined the company's new direction, heads nodded. Questions came, and he answered them clearly, decisively. He had the numbers. He had the strategy. And more than that, he had the room. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Outside the glass, Harmon was still standing near the wall. This time next to one of the junior receptionists. She leaned in and whispered something. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. She'd figured it out too. Back inside, Kenneth paused mid-sentence and looked around the table. We talk a lot about perception in this business, he said. How the market sees us. How competitors see us. But what matters more is how we see each other. A long pause. I walked into this room today the same man I've always been. But depending on how I was dressed, some of you would have seen a client, some a colleague, and some, he glanced toward the door, something else. No names. No anger. Just truth. And that was enough. The room remained silent. Not out of discomfort, but reflection. Kenneth let the moment settle. No rush to move past it. He knew the weight of stillness. Knew how sometimes the quiet could say more than anything scripted. He returned to his seat at the head of the table. Our values, he said slowly, can't just live in documents and speeches. They have to live in rooms like this. In moments where no one's watching or when someone thinks no one is. A few executives shifted in their chairs, not from guilt, but from realization. The kind that comes when the truth is laid bare with no theatrics, no shame, just clarity. Someone at the far end of the table, a senior partner from the Edison team, cleared his throat. Mr. Bryce, he said, that was, well said. Kenneth nodded once. It needed saying. He turned the page in his folder and continued the meeting, but the tone had shifted. What started as a quarterly strategy session had become something else entirely. And every person in that room would remember it. Not just for the deals discussed or the slides presented, but for what they almost didn't see until it was right in front of them. Outside, Harmon finally walked away from the glass. Slow steps. No radio in hand. No clipboard. Just the realization of what he'd done. And who he'd done it to. At the security desk, the receptionist glanced up as he passed. He didn't say anything. Just shook his head once, quietly, and kept walking toward the staff hallway. Back inside room 3C, Kenneth wrapped up his presentation. The slides faded and the screen went black behind him. There was a quiet murmur of approval around the table. A few nods. Someone clapped once, tentatively, but stopped when no one joined in. Kenneth stood still. Didn't bask in it. Didn't deflect. He was used to this part. What came next wasn't about celebration. It was about remembering. He looked around the table again. No need for applause, he said. Just follow through. Simple. Firm. A few executives lowered their eyes, thoughtful. Others met his gaze. There was no need to spell it out. They all understood what had happened before the meeting began, even if they hadn't seen it firsthand. Someone would mention it in passing. Someone already had. The meeting adjourned quietly. People gathered their things, murmuring about next steps and deliverables. But the usual hum of casual conversation wasn't there. Something quieter had settled in. Kenneth shook a few hands, accepted a polite "great session" from one of the partners, and offered a slight nod in return. He didn't linger. Rachel caught up with him as he stepped into the hallway. I had them hold the elevator for you, she said. Appreciate it, Kenneth replied. As they walked, they passed Harmon again. This time, the guard was standing near the fire exit, clipboard held loose at his side. His posture wasn't the same. No swagger, no command, just stillness. Kenneth glanced at him. Their eyes met briefly. No words exchanged, but the look said enough. Harmon looked down first. Rachel noticed but didn't comment. In the elevator, Kenneth finally spoke. Make sure the incident doesn't turn into gossip. Rachel nodded. Understood. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, he added. But I won't let it go unnoticed either. And that was the balance. Not vengeance. Just consequence. The elevator opened on the ground floor. Kenneth stepped out into the lobby. A few people glanced up, then quickly looked away, unsure if they should acknowledge him now. He walked past the front desk without pause. Rachel stayed a step behind, quiet, matching his pace. As they neared the main doors, the building manager appeared, suit slightly wrinkled, tie askew like he'd come down in a rush. "Mr. Bryce," he called, voice light but urgent. "I just wanted to extend my apologies personally for earlier. That should never have happened." Kenneth slowed, turned. The manager looked nervous, smiling too hard. Kenneth's expression remained unreadable. "You're right. It shouldn't have." The manager's smile faltered. Kenneth didn't add anything else. No lecture. No outburst. Just facts. He stepped past the man and pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon sun. Rachel stayed behind to handle the small talk. Inside, the lobby's chatter returned. But now it came with glances toward the exit, toward the man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't have to. They'd remember that. Kenneth walked across the lot toward his car. The sun was warm. A breeze passed through, stirring the edge of his sweater. He didn't rush. Didn't need to. At the far end of the lot, a woman in business heels and a suit jacket paused mid-call to watch him walk by. Her conversation faded as she turned, curiosity pulling at her. She'd heard something. Everyone had by now. Kenneth reached his car. A dark, clean sedan without vanity plates, without flash. He opened the door, slid inside, and sat for a moment. He didn't start the engine, just sat. It wasn't anger or pride. It was a familiar moment, one that came after people finally saw what had been there the whole time. Not a performance, not a title, just presence. That was the part they struggled with most. Not the surprise of who he was, but how certain he'd been the whole way through. As if he never once questioned whether he belonged. Because he didn't. Kenneth finally started the engine. The hum of the car was soft, steady. He pulled out of the parking lot without a glance back at the building. No need to revisit the moment. It would linger there on its own, replaying in the minds of those who'd witnessed pieces of it. Upstairs, the executives were likely debriefing already, discussing action items, deliverables, partnerships. None of them would say it outright, but they all felt it, how the room had shifted before the meeting even began. Not because of what Kenneth said, but because of how wrong they almost were. At the security desk, Harmon had returned. Quiet now, going through motions. He hadn't been reassigned yet, but his name had been noted. Not because Kenneth reported him, because someone else did. A witness from the lobby. No push, no demand, just a quiet email sent to HR. That was how these things moved sometimes. Slowly, quietly, but they moved. And Kenneth, already halfway down the boulevard, didn't need to know the details. He already understood how change starts. Back at headquarters, Kenneth pulled into the underground garage. Same spot he always used. No nameplate, just habit. Inside the building, a junior associate in the lobby looked up, spotted him, and offered a respectful nod, slightly sharper than usual. Kenneth returned it, unchanged. Upstairs, his office was bright with afternoon sun. A fresh stack of folders waited on his desk. Messages, updates, small fires needing small fixes. He sat down, checked his calendar, responded to 2 emails, then paused. Across his desk sat a memo draft from HR, circulating reminders about professional conduct with clients and visitors. No names, just policy. Kenneth scanned it, made a few edits. At the bottom, he added a sentence. Character is best measured when no one is watching, and no introductions have been made. He signed off, forwarded it, moved on to the next file. There was no announcement about what had happened that morning. No email blast. No official statement. But a message had been delivered, and it would be repeated, quietly, in glances and lowered voices for weeks. That evening, as the office lights dimmed floor by floor, Kenneth remained at his desk a few minutes longer. Not from exhaustion, from habit. He closed his laptop, gathered his notes, and moved without urgency. Outside his window, the city softened into dusk, steady, indifferent. Downstairs, the cleaning crew had started their rounds. A young man vacuuming near the elevators looked up as Kenneth passed. He gave a small, respectful nod. Kenneth nodded back. Outside, the air was cooler now. The city still moved, but slower. He walked the final block to his apartment, not thinking about the meeting or Harmon, or the stares he hadn't asked for. He thought about something quieter. A moment earlier that day, just before he spoke, when the room had gone completely still. Not because of a title, but because the assumptions had cracked. And everyone had seen it. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the correction, the realization. And for Kenneth, that was enough. For today.